that he can now walk you through some of these best practices for underperforming strategic accounts.
Well, Denny, thank you very much. It's always my pleasure to have the opportunity to share my experiences, both as a user of some of these practices, and certainly as well as a consultant in our own organization where we work with clients every day. And very proud to say that our company's been around for the last 25 years, and we always look forward to these opportunities to sort of give back and share that information. Today we're going to be talking, we're actually located, just so everybody knows, in the East Coast of the U.S., right outside of Washington, D.C., so it's a little early here, but for some people in other places, maybe some of our European colleagues or whatever, they're probably in midday and full steam. Today's topic is how to really address what we might term underperforming strategic accounts and really convert them to performing strategic accounts. That's what we're after today. I always like to say thank you for attending, and my kudos and hats off to all that are on the webinar this morning, because obviously ongoing learning and improving is probably what separates probably the good from the great. And our process, as Denny mentioned today, I'll be covering much of the information here in about a 35-minute window roughly, and then we'll make sure we leave time for the questions that are provided to us from today's participants. We are looking at this today a little bit from the supplier side efforts, what we can do just as a grounding principle. We ran across an interesting quote by David Schwartz, and for those who don't know who David Schwartz is, he's an American motivational writer and coach. He actually became real infamous with a book he wrote and published in roughly 1959 called The Magic of Thinking Big, and he also was a founder of the Creative Educational Services. The success combination in business is do what you do better and do more of what you do. It might be a little early for some of us to think through that, but I think it holds a lot of truth in what we're talking today about the importance of focusing on the right things, doing them consistently over and over. So how do you stack up? Today, we're going to talk about probably 5 basic ways to take a look at how we can migrate underperforming accounts to performing accounts. But certainly, probably one of the big things is start with a dashboard type concept of, certainly one way we measure if our accounts are performing is financial. It could be growth or margin. It could be wallet, opportunity share. It could even be our internal cost structure, sometimes our cost to revenue ratios. We also may measure success if our accounts are performing in the type of relationships we have, the points of contact, the trust, the collaboration, and certainly the future is how we're both positioned to move to the future around things like co-creation, innovation, our joint scorecards, and sustainability. So we're gonna come back to this later in the webinar, but just to get us thinking a little bit of how do we measure that? A fair amount of time ago, I ran into a concept that really, I think it's very pertinent this morning, and it has to do with attention units. You see, unfortunately, some of us in different parts of the country have had to use generators from time to time. But a generator, all generators are not equal. Many different kinds of generators put out different kinds of energy. But in a business context, we have these mythical amount of roughly 100 attention units to apply every day or every week as both an organization or a SAM team to our strategic accounts. And I'd like to offer up that probably as we go through this information today is to really think through how are we applying those attention units? Are we applying them in the proper distribution? We could almost say that synonymous with attention units is high-value activities. Are we executing the high-value activities that we're going to cover today? Because we all have this limited performance capacity. And we got places that we want to apply them. Do we want to apply them to our clients, our people, our account management process, our technology, which, by the way, could be synonymous with our own application or technology, as well as the value, the time we might spend quantifying the value we have with our accounts. Some of the core areas that we're going to talk about today that we might even refer to as potentially root causes of if why accounts are not performing where they need to is account segmentation, competency models, standard operating guidelines, account planning, and coaching the process. These are what this morning that we would refer to as high impact practices that can transition accounts from underperforming to performing. So let's start right away with looking at our generator and say how much of our attention units, and by the way, this is going to vary by organization, which one of these is going to probably get you the best lift as we look at these. So how much of our energy from this generator, our organization, do we want to apply the right energy on the right accounts? Segmentation, by the way, is been around for quite a while, but probably the most radical difference in the busy screen that you see there, and the purpose of the screen is really to drive home the point that the whole movement in segmentation today is if we're going to work on the right accounts, we probably should use a fact-based approach versus just intuition. I often say that decision-making has made a tremendous change from probably 70-80% intuitive, 20 to 30% fact-based, and it's almost reversed itself now. It's almost the inverse where we're seeing 80 to 90% fact-based decision-making versus 10 to 20% or 30% the most intuitive. The other major issue or challenge is that quite often a lot of organizations do segmentation and they look at purely the financial metric, which I would say is more of a rear view mirror metric, a lagging indicator. When we recommend segmentation to really better understand our customer, our account, we should use a combination of rear view as well as predictive analytics. Ultimately, when we do that fact-based analysis, we want to be able to plot our results in some kind of quadrants. Here I've just used a very simple, from left to right, invest, leverage, monitor, and capitalize. You want to understand where our accounts fall out in this analysis so that we can ultimately develop what I would recommend a treatment strategy. That enables us now to apply the right energy on the right accounts. When we apply the right energy, for example, on a leverage account, we could see an uptick, a pretty significant uptick in performance. Sometimes if we put too much energy in a monitor situation of accounts, it's pretty status quo based on how it came out of the segmentation, I may not see the uplift. But all of a sudden I've started to utilize a lot of my resources on potentially a situation that's not going to bear as much fruit as maybe another potential situation. So when I use segmentation, there are some real good practices, sort of our prescription for success around that. We certainly probably bring light to the second bullet. We already spoke to the first bullet, which is around we want to make sure there's a balance of past experience and knowledge in our segmentation model, as well as future performance criteria. We refer to that as having like a 50-50 balance. And if you were going to maybe slightly heavier on the future, because there's not much we can do about the past, what we really want to do is create more overperforming accounts for the future. Some of those criteria that we want to make sure we consider, certainly financial performance, but let's think about this. Let's talk about future revenue opportunity, wallet share, account feedback, the loyalty metric. A great indicator is, as you'll find out a little bit later in our webinar, that loyalty can be a great predictor of performing, helping our customers work more intimately with us and overperform. An example of that is we're working with an organization, and their treatment strategy before we met with them is basically almost as simple as it sounds, as all accounts were created equal. There was really no differentiation between the kinds of resources, what they were doing, treatment strategies or whatever, and the actual negative impact of something like that is some of their best or highest opportunity for accounts to overperform were receiving the same amount of attention and resources as accounts that really had much higher opportunities to perform. So when we use segmentation, we want to really dig back into that and make sure we're applying the right attention units into the right accounts. The second best practice that we want to talk about today is this whole topic around competency models and having the right energy by the right resources. And this is really one of the most significant areas that we can see an uptick. And one way that we see that is a little better focus and area of focus around talent management. And we've seen a lot of experiences in account management over the years where organizations naturally have promoted salespeople, their best salespeople in some cases, to become strategic account managers. While some of them have prevailed and done very well, let's be aware that there is a fairly significant difference between the activities and behaviors and attitudes of a strategic account manager potentially versus a salesperson. We see that quite often in just the definition of a salesperson that has a tendency to push to get more revenue versus an account manager may pull revenue through by their practices and behavior. So one of the strong ways to make sure we can convert underperforming accounts to performing accounts is to ensure that we've got the right resources, the right team on the right mission. And if the mission is to convert our current accounts to better performing accounts, let's take a look at who's on that team today and follow a fairly simple process and develop a performance model. And an easy way to do that we recommend is sort of benchmark or measure some of your top 3 performance. By the way, you need to do a little consideration here of geographical considerations. There could be some differences in the European community versus the Asia Pacific community or the U.S. community, North America. So we got to have some of that consideration. So when you segment your top performers, you might want to think about doing that a little bit by regions. You want to then sort of complete an assessment of the rest of your account manager or prospects for account managers, and you then want to ultimately analyze according to some kind of talent assessment instrument or tool where your team fits relevant to the recommended pattern around the most desirable strategic account manager, which is really derived from analyzing probably your top performers today. By the way, the yellow area is just, for example, that may shift. For example, in verbal reasoning, in some positions it may be higher. It could be people that pattern around 6, 7, 8, or 9, and numeric reasoning in some positions could be 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this is just an example, but the exact pattern would be established by the benchmarking you would do for your team. So when you start thinking about this whole, right energy by the right resources, there's some real critical considerations here we want to do. We want to really use the best in our role benchmarking, who our top performers are, probably over long periods of time. Be careful that's not just a short window. We want to make sure we've got some very clear definitions of what the actual position description is and look beyond salespeople for the SAM role. Recently, we were working with an organization, and the industry's not so much important, but what we found out, it was actually in the high-tech industry. What we found out when we went in is that in an industry with some declining revenues, declining margins, that the predominant types of people they had managing their strategic accounts were really salespeople when it was all said and done. And what they were finding was that their bandwidth actually was not there to do enough transactions to sell to compensate for declining prices and margin. They needed a much more strategic approach around some of their top accounts. So while their accounts were perceived to be underperforming, by simply making some changes and putting account management type professionals on the task at hand, accounts started performing because they were offering greater revenue and margin to the supplier because they were now purchasing strategically versus tactically. So purchase orders were larger, the reach and the relationships were larger. So there's a lot of pluses that can be an output of having the right people in the right task. The third practice we want to speak about today is really sort of a very important one, which is having some standard operating procedures, a playbook, so that that you're taking and everybody understands applying the right energy on the right initiatives. I had a background once upon a time in the military, and it was interesting. In the military, they had a operating manual for everything. So while we all were suspect that it was sort of an operating manual for dummies, like the books that became very famous out there today, there was a good reason, and that is that if you really wanted something done properly, you had to clearly lay out what that is. That led me to run into what I think was a very life-changing model for me in management and also business as a component of that. Was what I discovered is that when you looked at high performance teams or organizations that were trying to, enable their customers to perform high, certainly skills were important in product delivery and aptitude, but most often, probably one of the most significant gaps that we see or realize out there today is that there's not a real good clarity around goals, objectives, buy-in of the team, and even the expectations of what is expected around methodology process within our strategic account management program. So the ability, much like a sports team, if you took an American football team, even a European football team, even though the games are slightly different, we have playbooks. And when you execute according to the playbook, you have a tendency that when everybody knows what their role and responsibilities are and what to do, the methodology, you have a significant higher degree of success. Some of the most important things that a playbook answers or addresses for our customers is the what, the why, to whom, by whom, how, when, and what success looks like. What are we going to measure, our measurements and metrics? So all that is clearly defined. Playbooks are extremely important in strategic account management programs, especially at the corporate organizational level. They also are feeders for training. Quite often the training that is generated at some point is sort of a byproduct or an outproduct of what's contained in the playbook. The other key thing is that within playbooks, we hear that term cadence in business today, that it really lays out the clarity of what are those internal high-value activities and what are those clearly external high-value activities that we're expected to execute. Because in our playbook, we know what these are, we know how they're defined, we know who does what, and it's very clear. And if we're executing this, which some people could argue are some of the key ingredients of the strategic account management process, it surely enhances our probability for success. So the prescription for success of a playbook is really make sure that you've got a project owner. Make sure you collect all the available practices and supporting collateral within the organization. Get it all packaged. Get away from, if possible, sort of what we see as a case study example. We've run into a lot of organizations that have pockets of excellence. And unfortunately, a lot of people are performing things which I call random acts of courage based on their own skills or competencies. And quite often the sharing across business units or even geographical boundaries is not as strong. What a playbook can do is package all these process pieces that work well, the roles, responsibilities, practices, methodologies, and helps us socialize it across the organization. Why wouldn't we want to get all of our people doing the right things all the time? And that's what the playbook enables us to do, as well as I mentioned, be able to communicate that to the organization and train to it as the next step. The next area of using our attention units to transition underperforming accounts to performing accounts is account planning. Probably a good place for me to also point out that obviously as we cover all 5 of these, each individual organization or business segment may need to look at these and say which one are they going to get their most significant lift from, sort of like a gap analysis. If you were to do a gap analysis of your strategic account management program, you could probably identify which one of these you'd get your most lift from. But certainly in account planning is when it's all said and done, what is an account plan? An account plan is really a reservoir of knowledge, based on a hypothesis. It's basically saying based on what we know today and what we potentially could do with what we could learn, it would enable us to potentially move a relationship from the current state, whatever it is, to a more desired state, and for simplicity's sake, call it the partnership. So really what an account plan is, it's a plan based on facts, insights, qualitative, quantitative information for us to move both the relationship from both the customer or the account standpoint as well as the supplier standpoint to a much higher state. And again, you may use different terminology versus partnership, but certainly everybody knows, how important it is to have a much more, as you see, some of the key characteristics of a partnership: trust, transparency, mutual wins, innovative value creation. It's a much better desired state than a current state. This in itself can really transition underperforming accounts to performing accounts, because now there's that, as you see in the right column, the mutual wins. We get questions quite often. So what are some key things to consider around account plan? Well, probably one of the most important things is to keep it simple, and make sure that it's a team effort, that it's not something a person builds and then ends up sitting on a shelf. You want account plans to be dynamic and living. The questions I get quite often is, how often do you do them? You probably do them, at least you do them the first time, and you update them every quarter. And an account team should certainly do some snapshot reviews every month. Now, these are, as you see, some of the key components. Everybody has a little bit of variations to these, but really these 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 critical components, as you see listed on the screen, are most often pretty consistent across all account plans. I get questions quite a bit about, what's the best instruments and tools to use. It really depends on the environment of our customer. We've seen anywhere from CRM systems that contain this kind of information to very effective Excel worksheets that do account planning very well. So it's really the fact of, let's just have an account plan. But I think most important is, let's have a simple plan that contains facts, insights, and knowledge to guide us in how to transition our accounts to top performers, overachieving accounts. A very key component that I'd like to sort of segue into a little bit here that is quite often missing in the account plan is what the industry is now calling VOC, voice of the customer. We could argue it's really voice of the account in your plan. There's a couple real important quotes here that I think highlight that, organization's ability to learn and translate that learning into action rapidly is the ultimate competitive advantage. And gathering customer feedback can increase cross-sell and upsell by 15 to 20%. So if you're trying to convert, an account to a higher performing account, really what this is saying is, if I listen better, more effectively, have that feedback from my customer, this study by the corporate executive board tells me I will appreciate a better return on my investment in that account. Because you'll see right here, for example, share of wallet, there's a 31% delta improvement in share of wallet between a supplier and an account or a customer when they're more loyal. So if I'm really measuring the relationship between ourselves and our account, and I find out the critical gaps in that relationship, I can take actions that are in the best interest of both of these parties, because I'm really doing, as simple as it sounds, I'm really listening to my customer and doing the things that will create a more loyal client or account for us. Now, some people say, well, loyalty, well, maybe just think of it as the highest degree of customer satisfaction, because what we know, according to this study and other work that we've done around the topic of voice of the customer, is that there is a strong correlation between increased revenue and growth potential to more loyal customers. So when you're doing your account plan, it's real critical to understand the customer from their words, from their feedback. That's what's most critical. The other biggest gap that we're seeing, if you really want to get some uplift in these underperforming accounts, is take that knowledge, take that information that your customer gives you and go back and re-engage your customer and talk about the feedback. Don't make it anonymous. Take that feedback, integrate it into the account plan. The blue areas that you see in the diagram are really opportunities for us to do it internally, how we engage our own selves, our cross-functional teams around this. But probably more importantly is a little bit of the tan yellowish area are the external situations, opportunities for us to engage our customer and talk about what they told us. I think we all know that one of the frustrations around doing surveys is we never really know what happens to that information we give our suppliers. And what we're recommending here, one of the most significant gaps that have been identified by customers is they're not re-engaged on the information. So take that information, that right energy, and directed by the right knowledge, and probably the ultimate knowledge is what your customer is thinking or doing or going to do, and ask them about that. And what we're learning is they'll tell you. So the real prescription is KISS, keep it simple. Make sure that there's inputs from the internal team and outputs. Use metrics in account planning, and make sure that it's done by the core team members and that customer interactions are part of the account planning process. You certainly may not go out and share your whole account plan with your customer, but you may have a work plan, what we might call a collaborative action plan, to go out and validate some of those strategies and activities that you're scheduling within your account plan. The final best practice that we're going to speak to today is it may be the most important. Not singly the most important, but it may be the facilitator for making this happen. We actually, I would claim we invented a role many years ago called the process coach, the strategic account management process coach. It is one of the most critical roles in any strategic account management process. And that's because the process coach ensures that the right energy is driving the right processes within the program. So the process coach, quite often organizations start out on this journey of having a strategic account management program, and they have some success, little success, no success. It runs out of steam. More often than not, it's because there's no one in the organization to sort of carry that torch every day to ensure that the actual process is working. All of us should be in some way very familiar with a gentleman by the name of Deming. Deming, great engineer, did a lot of great work in the late 40s and 50s, helping to rebuild Japan and other engineering conquests that he's done. And he said, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So if you think back when I talked about the playbook, really what that was doing is giving us documentation to describe our strategic account management process. And then ultimately he said you can expect what you inspect. And probably one of the most significant deficiencies we see in some clients today is the lack of inspection of the strategic account management process around the relationship of the supplier and the customer themselves. And Deming emphasized the importance of measuring and testing to predict typical results. And really that's the dashboard concept. And also you could segue that into the concept of internal business reviews. It's critical. And when you do that kind of coaching as a process coach, you want to make sure you're coaching both the art as well as the science of strategic account management. There's two components. We don't want to just get lost into coaching financial performance. We want to coach some of the art involved as well as the science, the methodology, the internal business reviews, sort of the team building and structure, and the operating principles as laid out as I talked about in the playbook. And certainly when we do coaching, where's the dashboard? So if we're going to really work with our customers, our accounts, and help them to be more overachieving accounts, where's the metrics? Where's the dashboard around critical facts such as financial profiling or relationship profiling that we can potentially tie into compensation? For example, in strategic account management, there should be a bonus component, and those KPIs in the bonus component should certainly be a derivative of come from our metric-based dashboard that as an organization as well as a team that we're employing today. So as a prescription for success around this whole topic of process coaching is really let's let's make sure that we have the right metrics and that we're coaching the right processes every day. I know that some organizations bring in consulting resources, other third parties to help them develop their programs. Unfortunately, sometimes when those resources are finished their initial works, there's not the glue, the cohesion to keep it running. That process coach is what keeps it running. And the dashboard is that measurement that everybody looks at and they understand if we're doing a good job and making progress. I can point directly as a case study that we have a client, a significant chemical company in the industry, chemical industry, and their success is probably 90% due to how effective, and they've adopted this many years ago, they have an extraordinary process coach. And that extraordinary process coach every day is thinking about not only their assignment, what they do, but what as an organization can they do to continue improving the process. So finally, there's a few other additional performance points that if we keep with the theme of how do we convert these so-called underperforming accounts, strategic accounts to being top-performing accounts, there's a couple very important value-based reasons that strategic accounts in today's global economy may act on your behalf. And these are really questions for you to take with yourselves. Relevancy. Are we making a difference to the customer? Do we address their needs? You know, the opposite of that, unfortunately, is we're doing what we need to do. Are we really doing what they need us to do? Are we relevant in their world? The second is economic value. Years ago, when I was a aspiring young salesperson, everybody taught me how to sell value adds. Oh, well, today my argument is there's no value without economic value. You know, what is the compelling economic impact of our solution? Can we quantify it? We must. There's no economic value unless it's quantified and understood between your customer and the supplier. And the future. Every customer is out there today looking for the next breakthrough, that competitive advantage, that next advantage. How are they going to realize their vision for their employees, their stakeholders, their shareholders? How are they going to do that? What's the innovation? What is that next thing? So really, if you really want to optimize your customers, your accounts today and turning them into overperforming, my argument would be that it's the strategic supplier that certainly does the 5 best practices that I mentioned today, but also is relevant, has quantifiable economic value, and has a clear vision of what they're offering their client to move them into the future. So then when we go back to that initial sort of the scoreboard I put up there, we can positively say financially that our strategic accounts, when we do these, we will see, proven by SAMA, Strategic Account Management Association surveys, 6 to 14% growth in those accounts. We'll see greater sometimes than 70% wallet share, and we'll see less than, in some cases, a 1.5% SAM program cost of revenue. We'll see relationships that are high, wide, and deep, high trust and transparency and collaborative partnerships, and we'll see a future where both the supplier and the customer, the account, strategic account, are co-creating and innovating. They're scorecarding one another, and they've got this sustainable business model, this win-win business model. So, you know, in summary, brought you a lot of information. We've started to get quite a few questions in, and you know, I'll provide some closing comments after we address some of the questions. But this is sort of a very simple 35-minute, kept pretty close to the timeline here, recipe for if we really want to transition underperforming accounts. These are some of those best practices we can do to make that happen. Denny, I'm going to transition over to you to some of the questions.
Thank you, Dennis. Let me go through here real quick. All right, so I have a question for you as I read it that discusses or comes from more of the account's perspective, and it says customer attitudes and expectations toward us seem to have a large influence on the performance. Do you have any suggestions for handling? So I guess what they're really asking is, how do you handle, or what recommendations do you have to help change or work with attitudes and expectations of the account that might be hindering the performance as opposed to things that you can do internally as a team?
Okay. Okay, Denny, I'm going to address that. By the way, something just did come in real quick, and it was a question that I want to address about, will these slides be made available? In fact, not only the slides, but the entire webinar is going to be posted, and everybody in the webinar will receive a link in how to access that. So all this information will certainly be available to you. You'll receive a link to that and how to download it, and you know, it's our pleasure always to provide that. So back to the question, Denny, is there's no mystery that today in the economic pressures that a lot of companies are facing, that there could be some challenging customer situations, attitudes, and expectations. So what can we do? I think there's a list. I think number one is if we take a look at some of the information I reviewed today, I think we've got a big effort around educating our customer many times that 1 + 1 could equal 4. And that is that the more that we can show them what a partnership looks like and how we can work more collaboratively together and bring to them examples of how this has happened in other situations and why it might be in their best interest to maybe work with us more and not have 5 strategic suppliers, maybe have us as a strategic supplier. That is very, very powerful. I think the other key thing is to integrate your customer into what you might brand or publicize as a important strategic account management relationship, and really let them clearly understand how it's different than a selling relationship. So a lot of times we as suppliers foster some of those attitudes that are created. And then certainly we've all heard the importance of being high, wide, and deep. And that is, I think it's really important that as we look at our accounts, even within our account plan, that we take actions that allow us, our whole cross-functional team, to do a better job of building relationships high, wide, and deep within the customer. I think they're the key things that I think would help us right away, and probably ultimately, there's no mystery here, quantify what you're delivering to them. Really be able to say, look, your investment with us as a supplier is bearing this fruit as it relates to return on investment.
One more question. Let's do this one. Good one to end on. If you had to select one best practice, I guess of the ones that we discussed, that will make the biggest improvement in the shortest amount of time, which one would you choose?
Wow. You know, I think a lot of it starts at segmentation, and let me explain what I mean by that. I think segmentation sets the table for us to understand at least what accounts are really our strategic accounts, or what we might call partnering opportunities, so that we can, if you go back to the generator, really focus our energies in the right direction. I would probably start with that, because that really dictates quite a bit of information for us. It really can dictate the type of resources or numbers of resources we need. It could even dictate the whole what we need to make sure we have in our account plan selectively around particular accounts, because segmentation is going to be fed from that. So I think I would definitely make sure that that I had an effective segmentation model, fact-based model. But notwithstanding, I think I'd take a hard look at my whole account management process and account planning process to make sure that I'm working with facts more than just hypothesis, and that one of those critical facts would be that voice of my customer. I mean, without the voice of the customer, I just don't see how you can really move the needle and move that account to an overperforming account.
Good stuff. And thank you, Dennis, for spending the time and going through those best practices with everyone that's on the webinar. Thank you to the attendees that are still here and listening and your time. Very much appreciate it. Hopefully you found some nuggets you might be able to take back and put to work for you. Just to remind you, there is an ebook that covers the same topic on chapmanhq.com, chapmanhq.com. It goes into a little more detail into what you can do in terms of segmentation, account planning, a competency model, etc. So I would recommend that you go on there and download it. It'll bring some more of this stuff to life as well. And we will be publishing the slides and the presentation in the very near future, so you can have all that information at your fingertips or a click of the mouse. So thank you all again. I hope you have a happy Halloween.